to the Not Boring Tech Writer, a podcast sponsored by Knowledge Owl. Together, we hear from other writers to explore writing concepts and strategies, deepen our tech writing skills, get inspired, and connect with our distinctly not boring tech writing community. If you are passionate about documentation, you belong here, no matter your job title or experience level. Welcome. Hello, my lovely not boring tech writers. Today, I'm so excited to welcome to the pod a writer who doesn't really need an introduction since he was the founder and host of the Not Boring Tech Writer from, March 2016 until, the end of 2020 or the beginning of 21. So I'm delighted to welcome back the very not boring Jacob Moses. Jacob, welcome.
Hi, Kate. Thank you. So happy to be here.
It's kind of a full circle moment for me because I was a guest on the podcast when you hosted. So here we are doing a full not boring inception moment where I get to interview you instead. So for folks who maybe haven't dug into the back seasons and the older episodes, can you tell us a little bit about your tech writer villain origin story? How did you get into tech writing in the first place?
Absolutely. So it goes back to whenever I was in community college. I just moved up to Denton, Texas, beautiful little college town just north of Dallas. And I always knew I wanted to be a writer, but didn't really know in what exact space yet. So I was just doing my prerequisites at the time at a local community college, kicking up at this coffee house called Jupiter House, dabbling around, wearing an oversized hipster beanie at the time. And I heard this conversation behind me. This gentleman is with what I later learned was a client, talking about just some tech writing, gig work, freelance work. And I was like, this sounds interesting. Like they're talking about some interesting writing. They're talking about some actual, payment for this gentleman as well. And then so the client leaves, the writer sticks around. So I just turn around in my little swivel chair and say, hey, my man, what is it that you're up to? You're doing some writing work. This seems really cool. He said, Jacob, I got you. I don't know you, but I got you. This is what you need to do. You got to holler at Brenda Sims. She used to chair at the University of North Texas's technical communication department. I didn't know where I was going to go to finish my degree at the time. So I go to UNT, right down the block. At the time, it was one of the only universities in the United States where you actually get a bachelor's degree in tech comm or tech writing. Mm-hmm. And said, these are all the classes you need to take. Holler at these professors. It's a good life. Make it happen.
So it's just a chance meeting in a coffee shop. Oh, I love this so much.
And it's so funny, flash forward many years, about maybe more than 10, I ran into him at a pottery class in Dallas. We were one of 5 people in this random pottery class. Hadn't seen him since. His name's John. It's crazy. I thanked him for everything. But yeah, ended up studying tech comm at UNT. It was an absolute gift. Took classes on grants and proposals, high-tech manuals, procedures, branding, web design, all the goodies. And then so thereafter, graduated in 2015. My first gig was, I was a tech writer at Rainmaker Digital, formerly known as Copyblogger Media. They had a CMS called the Rainmaker platform that was doing end-user documentation. So I interned for a little bit there. And during that time, just kind of picked up on how people feel about tech writers, or at least at the time. Mm-hmm. Just kind of assuming that we're kind of boring and not really doing interesting work. And I was like, forget y'all. I'm going to name a podcast called the exact opposite, called the Not Boring Tech Writer. And yeah, just brought on a bunch of homies, people that I admired, Tom Johnson, peers here, to kind of celebrate tech writers, no matter where they're at in their careers or interests. And yeah, the rest is kind of history. And then in addition to my passion for writing, I'm very much interested in community development. So just thinking about the place in which I reside, what's happening there, and ways in which I can support my peers in kind of building prosperous neighborhoods. So during my time in Boulder, I, of course, was still checking in on my kinfolk in Denton, and just seeing a lot of interest in public and private investment in downtown. So just kind of considering all my options, I was looking at Boulder, a place that's amazing, has so many great amenities. They're already doing their thing. So I could stay there, of course, kind of benefit from, all of my predecessors' work, or consider returning back to Denton and kind of being a player, a major contributor in building these prosperous neighborhoods. So chose to move back, eventually did resign from Rainmaker and opened up in downtown Denton what I called a boutique bodega. So you can think about kind of a corner store-like space in terms of its footprint, but carrying kind of premium grocery product. So that was called Blue Bag Market. The premise of the name was it's in the middle of your neighborhood. You should just get enough to fill up one blue bag. We sold custom blue totes and then come back the next day. So trying to encourage people to live on a neighborhood level, support the homies on the block. So did blue bag for a bit. I was 23 at the time. My due diligence in real estate was lacking. So we were solvent-ish, but it was tough being owner-operator 7 days a week. But shout out Knowledge Owl. Our internal procedures were hosted with Knowledge Owl. As always, we're always trying to show love to tech writing folk, even though I was the only one who read the procedures because I was owner-operator and I had no employees. I said, I need to have documentation regardless. I need to write this down.
One of the things that's astounded me hosting now is how truly not boring most tech writers are. Like, we have really diverse interests, often really wild hobbies, all kinds of really fun stuff. So
absolutely. And I like the advocacy that's kind of baked into tech writers as well, where, like you said, we are all passionate. And on the advocacy side, which is so important these days, to be able to do it through the written word is so compelling. And to go to source material and have your theory be based on sources. And yeah, it's just lovely. All love for tech writers.
I often think that my tech writer villain origin story is partially because I have a terrible memory. And so through most of my working adult life, and even when I was a student, I would create like self-documentation, cheat sheets on how to do stuff, whatever, especially for work things that I only did like once a month or once a quarter. And that for me is, I believe, where like the first technical documentation I did. So I can totally see being an owner-operator of one, creating documentation for yourself to be able to like, oh, let's make sure I do this thing the same way or the fastest way or the easiest way, or I just don't have to retrain myself in how to use this thing that I never use.
Absolutely. And I think about that even in terms of like more objective documentation, like manuals, procedures, but also kind of like just subjectively, like it's nice to know what you believe in as a person. So whenever you have a passing thought, to write it down and to be able to reflect on it and have it inform stuff you do henceforth. I mean, all that kind of introspection and reflection in the written word is really lovely.
Yeah, 100%. We actually I did a solo episode recently talking about self-documentation as a form of reflection. And sometimes that interrogation of yourself to try to force yourself to just actually articulate some of those things can be so lying. Meaningful.
Absolutely.
But okay, so you were 23 as solo owner operator working 7 days a week.
Yeah.
Sounds like you got to a point where you were like, oh, this is not really working for me. So tell me a little bit more about what you did after that.
Yeah, so during that time, I was also looking for ways to serve my neighbors. And I found a local organization called the Denton Affordable Housing Corporation. They're a nonprofit doing affordable housing development in Denton, been at it since 1995. So I hollered at them and I was asked to join their board. As I was kind of fading out of Blue Bag, I did end up getting a gig at an international media organization called Strong Towns doing community building, which was nice because I was getting some affordable housing experience on the advocacy side at the Denton Affordable Housing Corporation, or DAC for short, if I say that long name again. And then also at more national level, I was consulting neighborhood groups across the country and how to advocate for their neighborhoods. So that was a hoot. Podcasted there as well. I ran a podcast called It's the Little Things, highlighting citizen advocates on how they're making their place stronger. And eventually left Strong Towns as well, as I was so generously offered the executive director position at DAC. June 2020, middle of the COVID pandemic, in the middle of which we so supported the CARES Act with eviction moratoriums, which was essential for public health interventions, but also tricky on the property owner side in terms of kind of cash flow and keeping homies paid on the personnel side and such. So I was 27 at the time, didn't have any concrete real estate development experience, but just like a hardcore advocate for the homies and blocks, no matter your income. So was the ED at DAC through, May of 2025, and then went to go start my own real estate development company. Still within the ethos of community development. So today, between myself and my brother, we're partners in an organization called Care Block Development, through which we primarily specialize in doing historic rehabs, These are buildings that we own. And actually, I formerly was a tenant in whenever I was a student at UNT.
That's a nice full circle moment also.
Yeah, it's a hoot. And just, I've always been so tight with these local property owners who are aging and are looking to kind of offload their assets. And they all just start calling me up and say, hey, Jacob, we appreciate the work you're doing in historic rehabs. You believe in neighborliness. So we've been at that for a bit now. My brother and I had a ton of fun doing realty, lending, acquisition, development, GC work, all the goodies. But really if you look at our website, careblockdevelopment.com, we strive for building lovable places. That's kind of the phrase that we use because we do believe in reciprocity. And we believe that if you build a lovable place, they'll be loved in return by whomever you might be leasing the home to. And kind of leaning on 3 tenants. So we believe that every home is a neighborhood, that it is a place to commune, to party, to gather, to support, to love. We believe in blurring public and private life in terms of really creating really interesting street life. I do believe that we progress towards kind of aiding America's ills through repetition, proximity, and accountability. And I do believe that happens in the commons, public spaces. And then lastly, and I think later on is the question about kind of what a piece of advice I have is, I'm going to tease it now. Our last tenant, I actually stole from Eric Holscher, the founder of Write the Docs,
Yes.
and following the Pac-Man rule, which has absolutely changed my life. I have goosebumps. I might cry. But this is part of the onboarding documentation for attendees of the Write the Docs conference, in that you walk into the conference hall and to be very acutely aware as an attendee to not form just the tight circle. There's no room for another homie to come kick it, but to always leave room, follow the Pac-Man rule.
Yeah, so you leave space for somebody else to join so that people, especially newcomers who don't know anybody else there, can easily walk up and join a group without having to feel like you're asking other people to move or displace themselves or interrupt the conversation. It is such a small thing, but it is so huge in changing the way that conference experience goes.
Always leave room for another homie. Absolutely. It's colossal. And then so we've literally translated that to all of our development work as well. So we're acutely aware of the role that real estate developers play in gentrification in particular, and we do not stray from those conversations. But we also believe in kind of incremental progress. We believe that places that struggle should not just continue to struggle because we choose to just have blanket kind of pushback on any kind of redevelopment. So part of the Pac-Man rule is kind of bringing everyone else up with us through the ways in which we host block parties, working with women and minority-owned businesses, but also being still acutely aware of having it not being like a philanthropic tilt, but actually trying to have legitimate systemic change at the block level. So that's what we're up to now. It's a blast. I'm just so grateful for my brother, all my homies, our tenants. We're throwing a tapas event next Saturday. One of our tenants is from Seville, Spain. Their first time in the United States is in Denton, Texas. They're going through the Fulbright program at UNT, but we partner with them to do a tapas event. They're getting paid. They're pushing tapas. So we're having the best time. And there's tech writing kind of scattered throughout all this work, which we can talk about if you like, but we're still very much in the tech writing game.
Yes. Although before we get into that, there's one thing I just want to pull back to something you said much earlier here. It was the idea of lovability. Mm-hmm. Because it's weirdly connecting to something else I've been thinking about a lot lately. So I read this blog post recently that was trying to redefine the concept of minimum viable product. Mm-hmm. And they suggest breaking it into 3 separate kind of concepts or steps: earliest testable, earliest usable, and earliest lovable. And that's a thing I've been thinking about in how to apply for me within documentation world, but that I think often there's strung throughout so much of our discourse is the idea of something just being consumed or being used. And we often sidestep the idea of it being lovable and of people connecting with it in some deep way. And for me, that's so much easier to conceptualize if you're talking about living spaces or community. But I think it should be something that we're also talking about with the software that we build or the documentation that we write or the services that we provide people, right?
Yes.
Like we're all humans trying to connect to other humans, and boy, shouldn't lovability be part of that thing?
Oh, my mind goes a million directions on that, Kate. In terms of lovability and different types of products and services, I'll first kind of harken back to my time at Blue Bag. An area in which we struggled was that we didn't have any ready-made product. So everything you could literally shop around. I see your dark chocolate and sea salt Kind Bar. I see how much it costs. I can shop that around at Family Dollar, Walmart, all the other retailers to kind of measure value as a consumer, which of course is fantastic. We want to be price conscious at so many levels. But you can't necessarily measure lovability. Lovability is subjective. The value is subjective. And if you can harness that for good, you can make legitimate impact in people's lives. So, like you said, in terms of how we document products and services, how we actually design it itself using design thinking, and to maximize the lovability side, to also make you a more solvent organization. I think about my time at Strong Towns. Most of our work was talking about municipal finance. And we think about city services and just maybe thinking that it's okay for cities to operate at a loss in perpetuity if it's for the good of the block, which is a fair thought. But eventually, if your liabilities are in excess of your assets, you may have to eventually cut off neighborhoods, which is a very scary thought. And they're going to be low-income minority neighborhoods. So I remember the director, Charles Marone, would always say, no matter how noble your product or service is, whether you're an orphanage or whatever, you always have to be solvent. Like your work exists because of your solvency. So if the top line for solvency is lovability, and it's actually having a benefit at the user level, that's a really great intervention to the silliness of capitalism today, perhaps.
Yeah, it's also we had some discussions around this at Knowledge all the last couple of years because we hadn't raised our prices in quite a long time. And with inflation and other things, we were at the point where we're like, we really need to do this. And so we were having conversations about, well, how much do we raise? What seems reasonable for our customers? And a big part of that conversation was us also saying, but what feels reasonable for us? Because we haven't raised prices for like 7 or 8 years. During that time, there's been a global pandemic. There's been significant inflation. We've been trying to hold this stuff steady because we care a lot about our customers and we don't want them to have to pay more money. But also, like, we need money to live on. We need money to keep the company solvent. And there is something to be said for recognizing that for all of those pieces to come together, you do need to focus on the finance piece a bit because you can provide much more to the folks that you care about or who you're serving if you aren't just like scraping by, but like doing well but having the goal not be, we just want to make a lot of profit to make a lot of profit, but we want to make profit so that we can plow more back into the product or hire somebody to handle this thing that we've always wanted to do, but we've never been able to do because we didn't have the budget for it. Or in our case, we're part of 1% for People and Planet. So we donate to a bunch of environmental organizations. Every month, one of the owls nominates an organization in their community, and we donate a portion to that. And all of those things, all of those little like branching out into the community, trying to help other organizations, those things are only possible if we're solvent enough to do it. So there is that question of, in order to provide the service that you want to provide in the way you want to provide it, you kind of need to make enough money to stay alive, to keep that organization going, to be able to feed into those places. And so it's not like profit for the sake of profit, but it's profit for a purpose. In order to achieve the purpose we want, we need to bring in enough money to do this. How do we do that in a way that feels authentic and not exploitative?
Absolutely. And from the user's perspective, if the lovability is the value that they get from it and it's legitimate lovability that comes from a good place, that's a fair value proposition. Yeah. And it can be iterative, which is the best part. Just-in-time documentation, let's go back and forth. Like, what are you messing with? What is lovability to you? We're not going to make any assumptions.
Yeah.
Shut up, Homer, just-in-time documentation.
Yeah. And sometimes the things that people love are not the things that you expected that they would love. There are, in our case, in the software world, there are features in the product that we maybe didn't put a lot of effort into. It was somebody requested this. We built it at some point. We did it in a fairly, let's throw something together and see if this meets their needs, and we'll come back and build it out more later. And then we never came back and built it out more. Story of every software company everywhere. But some of those features become beloved by certain authors who are like, I use this in these ways and it's helped meet these needs. And if you're not having those conversations about what makes something lovable to you, you may be missing opportunities where it's like one little change in how we do this. Let's just optimize this one thing that we haven't given a lot of love to for a while. Let's give it a little bit of love. Let's update the user design or whatever. And suddenly, this thing that was maybe a little back burner side thought 5 years ago becomes like a central feature that people adore and want to tell other people about and do stuff. Has it been a similar thing for you in the community development space, where there have been some things that you were kind of surprised ended up getting the kind of leverage or attention that they got?
I was surprised to have some theories that proved to be true, at least at the property level at some of our properties. So kind of my overall premise on urban design and public investment is that humans really don't need that much to have a good time. You don't have to put every public art project through a public arts commission to be ridiculed and criticized and to check every box on development codes that eventually just faces a 5-lane highway or a Wendy's. But there's just like little things you could do, kind of observing where people already struggle or they're already having a good time, and just do smaller interventions to help them have just a better hang. So the main way that CareBlock kind of thinks through that on the design side is it's unconditioned spaces, it's front and back porches, and how my theory was that they can be platforms for self-expression. Kind of going back to what I think is the premise of kind of societal change, proximity, repetition, and accountability, creating places, especially in the commons, in which people feel like they can express themselves. So I remember one of our first events, we partnered with a group that I'm actually looking at here from our office. My homies Sid and Gannon, shout out if you're listening, at the Steady Hands Artist Cooperative. So these are all former art students at UNT who graduated and were trying to untrain themselves and kind of support their fellow artists in how they display art. It doesn't have to be through traditional channels, and it doesn't have to be high barrier to entry. And then so their mission is to have low to no cost opportunities to showcase your art. So we partnered with them for a block party, and we have I'm in this beautiful 1907 Craftsman in downtown Denton wraparound porch, and we used one of the porches to host a art and music festival. Didn't pull no permits. We do permits for the important stuff. We don't do permits for the really important stuff like block parties and hangs. But the premise was this is the middle of a residential neighborhood. If you look at the zoning code, the city doesn't want you to actually have a good time because it only allows single family homes. It doesn't allow any kind of commerce and third places and community building. So we just said, we're going to do it anyways. And we had several hundred attendees. It was a free event. People rolled up. We partnered with local musicians, local artists. They were making money. They were showcasing their work. We were pushing my homeboy, David's Cueva Nueva. It's a Spanish Rojo Vermouth out of Spain. Just getting rowdy. But long-winded way to say that, like, I've recognized through the development side of our work is that people don't need much to have a good hang, to enjoy each other's company, meaning that we have more resources to allocate that on CareBlock's goal, every corner in every neighborhood in Denton and in this country. Thinking back to solvency and risk management and financial management, people are ready to have a good time. We don't have to really rack our brains on how to do it. Let's just observe where people struggle, build community around it, and have a good hang.
Yeah, sometimes you don't need to overthink the solution. Sometimes you don't even need to provide a solution. You just need to provide a space.
Yeah. I'm going to go back. I think you want me to talk about tech writing and get less kind of back row ethos stuff. Let me talk about how this actually translates to our documentation work.
Please.
So at CareBlock, part of our work is building and acquiring properties for lease. So we lease to folk in the neighborhood. And then so, of course, just my tech writing mind is like, let's have a good time onboarding. So one of our recent examples, we bought a 5-unit building in my neighborhood built in 1886, one of which I lived in. And the previous owner had owned it for, I think, 40 some years and just had lore in Denton. Like if you're in Denton, you've known someone that's lived in this building, you've lived in it yourself. So of course, if there's any change in ownership, there's some understandable uncertainty about what's next.
Yeah,
Are they going to crank up the rents? Are they going to not bring me new air filters? Like what's about to go down? And so we created these little laminated cards that gave just a really interesting story on CareBlock owners being past residences, QR code to go to kind of a full page on learning more about CareBlock does. And then and this is common in Denton, it's probably common in other places, of just having property owners that don't maintain properties, they ignore work orders. So the first thing we did, we had a second laminate card with a QR code where they could scan it to submit their work orders. Just a nice little gesture of like, if stuff is going wrong, we want you to have a lovable place, we'll come fix it. And thinking about kind of the user experience and being empathetic to different ways in which people want to communicate, especially the tenant to landlord relationship.
Yeah.
We also made it clear in our onboarding documentation that you can also text me personally, you can call me personally, you can email me. But there's also people who, and I love them equally, don't actually want to correspond verbally or in the written word with their landlord. So we had a software where instead they could just fill out a form for their work orders for which we'd be notified. So that was a hoot. It also came with like a self-help guide on if anything's catastrophic, how to respond immediately, identifying fire extinguishers on site, how to use them. Gifted everyone a water meter key to show off the water if there's a leak. All things we would do immediately. I mean, we're block kids. I walk past this home every day and kick with my tenants. But say, I'm elsewhere for some reason, ways in which they can also look out for their own belongings. So again, just kind of harkening back to Bree's work, according to the just-in-time documentation approach back in her Survey Gizmo days, and just wanting to create really tight feedback loops. This is also some more Bree shout-outs. I don't remember the episode number. It was definitely one of the first few. But she advocated for help documentation to have a little feedback mechanism where you could say this was helpful, this was unhelpful, and then kind of using that to iterate and gradually improve upon your help documentation. So we definitely translate that to our real estate work as well, getting guidance on any kind of aesthetic and cosmetic improvements to make sure people are interested in the work and that it represents their lifestyle, their ideologies and stuff. So that's a blast. I love doing that work.
I also really love that it's kind of predicated on acknowledging that different people have different ways of wanting to engage or not engage, or self-help or not self-help. And so like there's multiple paths to potential engagement there, right? You have the folks who might want to submit a work order, might want to text or call you personally or shoot you an email, but you also might have folks who just kind of want to self-serve as much as they can. Yeah. And so that documentation that helps them like shut off the water if they're suddenly having a leak, that is empowering to people who do not want to have a high level engagement until they're kind of required to have a high level of engagement.
Absolutely.
But there's also the flip side of that there's an advantage to you for people being empowered to do that as a property owner, because if it takes you 4 hours to be able to go turn off the water main, if they've got a leak, now you're dealing with potential water damage. Whereas if they were able to self-serve and turn it off within the first 15 minutes of noticing it, you don't have a massive issue there. They have a better experience because they were able to kind of stop it and potentially reach out. You have a better experience because when you find out about it, it hasn't blown into some catastrophic, expensive thing. And most of that is enabled just by recognizing that people have different levels of comfort with engaging, levels of comfort with self-serving, and that different paths would be appropriate there.
Yeah, we love it. And then concurrently, the whole time, we're constantly Pac-Manning. I guess Pac-Man could be a noun in the first example. Now I'm gonna make a gerund. I'm gonna do a verb gerund.
Go for it.
We're always Pac-Manning in that, in case, because we do host a lot of events, a lot of block parties, a lot of ways in which people can interact with CareBlock further. because we do have an economic development component partnering with local small businesses to give them some exposure at our events. On the realty and lending side, we're deep in some of these FHA government products, which have very low down payment requirements. And because we also do construction, there's ways to consider a backyard apartments or little shut-off doorways where you can actually subsidize your mortgage and underwriters count towards income. As we think about how we can actually house the lower to middle class, we're very privy to all that work. But if someone just wants to do self-service forever, to love them equally. It's just like the best part in all this work, to know that you're celebrated and beloved by CareBlock, regardless of how much you choose to interact with some of our tertiary services.
Yeah, regardless of your level of engagement there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, which if I can extend that kind of into the software world, the folks that you hear from the most are usually the people talking to your customer support or your customer success folks or their account executives or whomever. But there's also often this huge swath of your end users who you never hear from, who might be totally thrilled about using your product, but they're not the kind of person who's going to reach out with that little feedback option and be like, hey, I love you guys. Instead, they're just going to be quietly plugging away doing the thing. And you should appreciate them and create stuff for them just as much as the folks who are being the squeaky wheel about the always telling you, oh, I've got this idea, or I really want this, or I noticed this thing's a little weird. Like, yes. You are trying to serve the full community there.
Absolutely. And thinking more so even about documentation and being transparent and helpful to our users. We recently rolled out our general contracting line of business as well, where we're taking on clients to do historic rehabs. And I didn't have experience on the GC side. I was mostly a developer role at DEC, but not actually putting together estimates and quotes and giving subs and such. Mm-hmm. So I remember on the first few jobs, it was an interesting problem to think through. How do I go about this? Do I use a spreadsheet? Do I need to consider some softwares? Mm-hmm. I have to adopt a bit of cultural humility because a lot of our subs are native Spanish speakers, or English as a second language. So it's just this really interesting conundrum to think about how can I make sure everyone feels heard and marketed accordingly as it relates to the product and service that CareBlock offers. And we eventually ended up getting a software called JobTread, which has been a ton of fun. There's Gantt charts. I haven't really messed with Gantt charts much, but that's been a really fun experience. And again, just the self-service even on the subcontractor side, where we upload all of our selections, materials our clients want. So instead of a sub calling me saying, what kind of tile does the homie Abden want? It's already uploaded. They have a unique login that just happens through a mobile app. There's no fumbling with logins and such. And then even on the client side, I see my boy Rafe walking. What's up, Rafe? I love this neighborhood. On the client side, and I remember the kind of account executive at JobChat was like, why would you want to do that? How we do our estimates is that we give our client a unique link to actually watch me in real time populate estimates. And I'm getting quotes from subs. And they're like, that's not how this works. Like, you're not supposed to like show like the actual process. But I'm like, I want to demonstrate progress. Like, I don't want a client to be like, what's homeboy Jacob been up to for 2 weeks? I know this is a big job, but this feels like a little excessive. I want them to see that I'm working on the task at hand. And it's been beneficial to us. I mean, kind of going back to the lovability. Lovability is immeasurable when you feel it. Let's kind of design around that to help a client feel like they're being loved and cared for, hence the name CareBlock. So yeah, we have fun.
A lot of that feels like you're centering humans. Like that a lot of those decisions are made centering the fact that they are decisions that impact other humans rather than centering like, let's do the most efficient process here or whatever, that it is recognizing that those processes are impacting other people's lives. And to the extent that you have empathy as a human being, you're trying to center, okay, what would I want from this experience if I were the person on the receiving end of this? I would want to understand where things were at. I would want to understand a little bit about how that process works. Do I need like every detail ever imaginable? Probably not, but you can treat folks with respect respecting their shared humanity, their shared interest in what's happening with places that I might live or that I am living, and recognizing that that's a thing that causes a great deal of potential stress, potential resistance, but also potential excitement. And then building processes that center humans, but also achieve your goal of actually moving forward with whatever the project is.
Absolutely. And then think about how that self-service on the estimating side translates to how I deploy my finite resources. I'm getting less calls from the client inquiring about how the estimating is coming along. Less inquiry. We're very clear about our process. We do cost plus in all of our agreements. There's all this transparency up front. And we kind of take them on the hero's journey throughout to ultimately the end product of having a rehabbed or newly constructed home. And they feel privy to the process. P2P. Goofy. So goofy. But we like it. And it's so counterintuitive for people in my space. But we love just kind of blowing up and reconstructing systems that we don't think are serving people. And it's been overall very beneficial.
So often it feels like we end up being at the mercy of the system instead of recognizing that the system has been designed and implemented by people and therefore could be redesigned and implemented differently.
Yeah, it goes back to the design thinking. That's a throwback, Not Boring Tech Writer episode as well with Chris Lamb, perhaps. But yeah, just getting the user involved from the start and what actually informs your product or service, especially on the software side.
Yep.
What are kids feeling? Make assumptions, challenge those assumptions, and then iterate thereafter.
Yep. By the way, all of these callbacks to earlier episodes, we will definitely link to them in the show notes. So if you want to use this as an entry point into some of those older episodes, please do. We'll link it and we'll help you get there.
Cool.
And this might be a good spot for us to take a break. So we're going to take a quick break and we will be right back. This episode is sponsored by KnowledgeOwl, your team's next knowledge-based solution. You don't have to be a technical wizard to use KnowledgeOwl. Our intuitive, robust features empower teammates of all feathers to spend more time on content and less time on administration. Learn more and sign up for a free 30-day trial at knowledgeowl.com. And we are back. So, Jacob, I think it's really awesome that you are still creating technical documentation in a sphere that is not necessarily a technical writing sphere. But I also feel like something we're dancing around a little bit here, which is that there are some skills that we kind of cultivate as tech writers that can be applied a whole bunch of places that aren't necessarily documentation. And since you went to school for technical communication and you have worked as a technical writer, but you're now doing very different things, I feel like you are the perfect person for me to ask this of, are there skills that have translated for you outside of technical communication into other things that you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. The first one that comes to mind, I'll kind of harken back to my time at Strong Towns, where we were supporting neighborhood groups in terms of how to advocate for their own place, but also supporting city officials, staff, council members on how they can also serve their constituents. So when the public investment side and the municipal kind of operation side, sadly, what happens is you have your council members, your city staff, your mayor go to a big kind of municipality conference. Here, to be told, okay, this is what you need to do to run a city. This is a development code you need to implement. These are ordinances that you need to adopt. And then so straight up, and I empathize with it because running the city is very challenging. But what literally happens is a lot of copy and pasting from maybe some ordinances or some zoning codes that you're told you should consider, without actually stress testing those in your actual city. So thinking about my time at Strong Towns, a major skill that I learned through tech writing, of course, was to be deeply involved with the user, to be deeply involved with anyone who supports you in creating that user documentation, whether it's customer support, developers, salespeople, if your documentation is part of sales collateral, all the goodies. So understood that very deeply. And then also, again, shout out to the homie Bree and Mary Beth and yourself and all the homies, understanding that kind of that first intervention, that first means by which you choose to support your people doesn't have to be perfect. you can test the theory and iterate thereafter. So on the kind of public investment side, what I learned about strong towns, which has been very beneficial to all the people that are supported, is kind of following 3 rules for public investment. And they go as such: humbly observe where people struggle, do the next small thing to address that struggle, and repeat.
Oh, I love this.
It doesn't have to be top down, doesn't have to be all at once. You have users of your product and service. Where are they struggling with it? Having some intellectual humility and dropping the ego a bit to be like, okay, I got you. I thought this was going to be helpful. It wasn't, my bad. Let's pivot. I got you. So that's been deeply productive and effective in cities all throughout the United States. We have many municipalities that are adopting what we call the strong towns approach. And we're seeing actually boost in quality of life. It doesn't take much to paint a crosswalk, to install a street light, little traffic calming interventions, stuff that actually translates to a better user experience, whether you're a user of a software product or a constituent of your city and your neighborhood. So that one comes to mind initially. And then someone whom I really look up to, who I've never met, I just read about their work. There's is she a philosopher? I don't recall her title. She does all the things. Her name's Elinor Ostrom.
Okay.
And wrote a book about the commons, essentially common areas that we all kind of cohabitate and have some shared responsibility for. And she has this excellent term, and this kind of harkens back to Care Block's work in understanding that people like to communicate in different ways and to show a lot of grace in that. They might be rambling for a bit. They might maybe call you a couple of bad names because they're angry, but to understand that we're going to get to like the crux of their problem that we can work around.
Yeah.
But Elinor has this great term called cheap talk, where essentially we need to have really hard conversations in places in which people feel comfortable, which isn't always necessarily, say, city council chambers. It may not be in a live Slack chat or something with your users as you're trying to understand ways in which you can improve the product or service. So kind of her work in cheap talk was like, we need to kick it with people in their rec centers, in their community centers, on their street corners, and let them talk how they talk.
Yeah.
Not to come in with these perfect little buckets and how they have to be heard for you to recognize what they need. To let homies ramble. There's a great line in The Wire that goes, "Take it light, but take it." Just like that's the part of this work. I mean, we love service. It's why we become tech writers. It's why we're in Q&A. It's why we are inventive in creating new products and services. I mean, we see where people struggle and we want to do something about it. So cheap talk is a huge part of Care Block's work. We try so hard to demonstrate cultural humility and not to make any kind of assumptions in which what we think is best for somebody. In terms of, we do a lot of kind of reasonable accommodations for vision and mobility impairments. We never assume what that looks like. We hypothesize because we're professionals in this. We have expertise in actual fixtures and furnishings that we think address mobility and vision impairments, but we understand that the end user is actually the expert. So, and understand that it can take a while to get there and to never judge or to have preconceived notions of what care and support looks like. And then, of course, after someone feels like they're heard, which we say all the time, do you feel heard? A lot of my work at the Denton Affordable Housing Corporation was going through neighborhood meetings where you had neighbors who didn't want to have an affordable housing project in their backyard. NIMBY is a common term, not in my backyard.
Not in my backyard, yeah.
Which is, I empathize with the suburban dream you were promised by your realtor 30 years ago that your neighborhood would never change. You'll never have new neighbors. You can always pull into your garage, close it behind you. And a verse from Harvey Milk, another person I just so look up to, RIP, just kind of see the world in not so perfect color. That's supposed to reorient ourselves towards the street. So even in the kind of the user experience, a lot of our public engagement, we never rolled our eyes, never talked mess, let people say what they need to say, and always finish with, "Do you feel heard?" Which is also great work, I think, in technical documentation, in that you want to make sure that user feels understood. Mm-hmm. And there's a term in healthcare, motivational interviewing, where you actually want patients to say back to you what you said, how you interpreted their needs and their struggles and their hopes and dreams and goals and such. And that's all stuff I learned as a tech writer. And just kind of the kindness and the empathy and just being, the phrase I use is just pro homie. Like, we're just always about homies. And if you're always pro homie and you're always pro block, like the world works in your favor. I truly do believe that. And yeah, all of that work is from being a tech writer, being a storyteller, understanding brand and consistency, and demonstrating thoughtful ways to respond to queries. Yeah, all stuff that happened because of tech writing and because I met Mary Beth in Boulder and ate jumbo shrimp at Survey Gizmo.
Very nice.
Yeah.
I mean, I think some of it is, like you mentioned, having humility in those conversations. I think as tech writers, we often have to center humility because we are talking often internally to subject matter experts who know way more about the thing than we do. But we also are often talking to end users and recognizing that our experience and what we know about the product might be very different than what their day-to-day looks like. And so that both humility, but also asking questions and actually listening to the answers, asking questions to get information or to get perspective, not just to make it seem like you're asking questions, or pretending that you're hearing people, but actually hearing people, actually paying attention to what they need is huge, I think.
It is very much so. And it's a very humbling experience because sometimes, guess what? They might be right.
Yes.
They may not have the title that would associate that kind of expertise, but you're like, oh, further, again, like, my bad. Like, yeah, you're right on this. And then what's just a great experience for just as a human as well. I mean, your brain gets a little bigger, your heart gets a little bigger, the product gets better. I mean, you and I talked offline, Kate, about just the collective call to action to kind of take ourselves less seriously and how we assign expertise and expertise for whom and by whom. Yeah.
For me, so I was a knowledge customer before I ever worked here. So I was an end user for several years, back when I was still Help Gizmo. In fact, that's how long ago I started. And then I started working here. And I thought as an end user that I understood the product really well. And then I started working here and I realized that almost every end user I talked to used the product slightly differently from the way I did. So I was kind of an expert in the way I used it. But what I learned was that every single user kind of puts their own stamp on how they use your thing. And so there's always exciting stuff you can learn from them. I feel like every time I do a customer call, even now, what is this? 11 years later, maybe, even now I'll get in and I'll be like, oh, show me how you do that. I'll be like, I've never seen anybody use the product that way before in 11 years. But it's interesting. It does kind of fit what you're trying to do really well. And sometimes there will be some other element I can pull in and say, oh, but this part of this process feels like you're doing a lot of extra work. We do have this feature that kind of does like 80% of that. Have you tried using that and you didn't like it? Did you not know that it existed? And sometimes that leads us to a really interesting collaborative place of being able to say, oh, maybe we can tweak what you're doing. You'll keep however much of it you want to keep, but maybe we can remove 15% of the work you're doing because you can pull in this other feature that's not perfectly designed for this, but it's close enough. And we can find a way to kind of get you there that feels still authentic for you, but also slightly less complicated.
Oh, absolutely. And then even going back to the conversation of an organization's solvency and how lovability can be a top line item on financial statements. I mean, again, we do all this with sincerity and genuineness and authenticity. And we never want someone to feel like it's extractive or insincere. But the more that someone feels like they're a part of something, they become advocates for the product as well.
Yeah.
And that's what I experienced with Knowledge Owl. I was tight with Mary Beth. I got to know yourself. I got to know Chad. And it's just like, I didn't even want to shop around. Like there might have been other knowledge-based softwares. I didn't care. Granted, my previous board of directors, please do not inquire. Because Dak also used knowledge owl, and I promised I was a fiduciary for our dues and subscriptions line item on our financial statements. But you kind of, and again, we don't want anyone to, of course, worship an organization,
right?
But they become a bit of an acolyte. They become marketing collateral for you, which can, of course, improve revenue. But like everyone's just like game for it. Again, going back to the doing well by doing good kind of principle. Yeah.
I like to do business with people I like. Like if I'm looking at two products that are the same, but I've had way better interactions with one of those companies, that'll be the one that I choose. 100%. It was also a big piece of why I chose Help Gizmo back in the day. I was a little software company. We were a little bootstrapped software company. I was not happy with our current documentation platform. And then I found what was then Help Gizmo, and they were a little software company. And I could tell in every interaction with them that they valued having good human connections as much as I did. And I was like, this is kind of rare in the software world. And I like supporting software companies that seem to care about people. I'd rather see those companies do well.
And I don't know if this is an appropriate kind of sidebar. I want to be conscientious of your listeners who maybe are unconcerned about housing and community development, which I just keep talking about. But I've generally opted out of the AI game. It's not really applicable to my work. But I'm curious. I'm sure it's top of mind for many tech writers, especially on all the forms of help documentation, chatbots, software documentation, all the goodies.
Yep.
Have there been conversations about kind of the relationship between AI and somehow trying to maintain the humility and interest in user experience for folk these days?
Yes, I would say there have been. I would say, well, I say this because I keep having them. So I'm sure other writers are having them as well. Because for me, that is the distinguishing factor for me, is that I don't think AI can have empathy. And we as humans can have empathy. And that's a thing that we bring that no amount of tooling will ever bring. And so you might use AI to streamline certain things, but I think the companies who believe that AI is going to fully replace tech writers, for example, I think are really underestimating how important empathy is in what makes good documentation good.
Absolutely.
That's not just words on the page. And so I think that is one of the ethical considerations that people are trying to wrap their heads around, while also recognizing that a lot of us work in software and have a lot of pressure to incorporate AI into our workflows. And how do we do that in ways that actually feel helpful and useful, but that also aren't necessarily, feeding some of those models information that they can then use somewhere else that they shouldn't have access to, or without compromising the integrity of what relationship we've already built with our end users. For me, that's the thing that's always top of mind when we start talking about AI, is we have done a whole lot in our own documentation to kind of start with empathy. And my concern of adopting any AI tool heavily into that workflow is that it decenters empathy and instead just centers like efficient production of documentation. But efficient production of slop doesn't feel like it's useful.
Snapping. Snapping into the mic.
That's it, Jacob. I'm going to have that mental image of you just snapping every time we get into one of these conversations now. Although on that note, as we're thinking about what's useful, what's not useful, what makes for good docs, because we've had such a far-ranging conversation, and you have mentioned some lovely resources on the thinking about public common spaces and other things. Are there any other resources that you would kind of love to share out with our listeners that have been impactful for you, or that might just kind of get them thinking creatively about things?
Generally speaking, as it relates to documentation, all the goodies?
Anything is fair game here. It doesn't have to do with documentation at all.
A book that changed my life. Again, just kind of the weirdness of people offering me things I don't really have the merit to do. Madcap invited me to speak at their MadFlare conference.
Oh, wow.
When was this? Gosh, crazy. But I was working at Rainmaker Digital at the time. I was like a year into that gig, and they're like, you and the Not Boring Tech Writer. come give 2 1-hour-long presentations at Mad World in San Diego in
Wow.
the Gaslamp District. I was like, well, this is crazy. Okay, I'll go. Flew into LAX, rode the Amtrak into San Diego. It's crazy business. But one of the 2 presentations were how to build your influence as a tech writer. And the last slide that I showed was a quote from Anne Lamott, a writer who I adore. Shout out Anne Lamott. I have all of her books everywhere, all over my home. And I might butcher it. I'm going to try to say it. So it's a book, essentially. It's sort of a how to write book, it's sort of a self-help book. It's kind of like Stephen King's On Writing, where it hits everything.
Bird by Bird. You've got to be referring to Bird by Bird.
Yeah, Bird by Bird. Yeah, I didn't even see the title. That's my bad.
It's all right. I got you.
Yeah, there's a chapter in there that goes, like, have the courage to believe that what you think has some merit and to put it down on paper. Like going back to our initial conversation about like the value of documentation in terms of self-reflection and being able to look back at it and build around it. It's highlighted some here. I'm a crazy post-it flag kid, and I'm just looking at stacks on stacks of post-it flags. But that was the final slide of that presentation in terms of, I was kind of framing influence in that presentation around just kind of maintaining the relevancy of tech writers.
Yeah.
And just wanting them to be loved on. And how you can do that through having original thoughts on your space and sharing it with people. So yeah, Anne Lamott's Bird by Bird is a gift. So is Joe Jones. So is a bunch of other books by Anne Lamott.
Yeah, she's fantastic.
Another one, I mean, just generally speaking, so much of my work today is realizing that if we're going to have, more prosperous neighborhoods in which everyone, is elevated, minorities, low-income people, all of our homies, we have to kind of tighten the feedback loop between policy and where the consequences of policy actually exist. Mm-hmm. So I've been really interested in the healthcare side of that. There's a book by Prabhat Singh called Dying and Living in the Neighborhood. That's fantastic. What got me into all of this work is Jane Jacobs' Death and Life of the Great American City.
Oh, I love it.
That book's a gift. She was in Greenwich Village in Brooklyn in the 60s whenever Robert Moses was mayor and trying to run highways through Washington Square Park, which has now been a platform for major advocacy and change in the city of New York. That book's a gift. Am I listening to anything these days? I listen to The Not Boring Tech Writer because homies on homies.
I hope you feel that we're doing justice to the original concept.
Absolutely. We're in a weird political space right now in this world. No matter what your ideologies are, I think we all see that stuff is not working. Kind of an interesting antithesis to that is Harvey Milk's, was written by Randy Schultz, who's a fantastic writer about kind of the AIDS crisis and kind of LGBTQ life in San Francisco. Mm-hmm. But wrote a book about Harvey Milk called The Mayor of Castro Street, and a really lovely book and story about Harvey Milk and how he, as a gay man in San Francisco, was able to move a lot of people from a lot of different backgrounds and ideologies just because he empathized and heard where they struggled and wanted to do something about that struggle. So my mind is definitely very much deep in like neighborhood quality of life these days. So that's what I'm reading. And yet to the extent to which that's beneficial for people in their tech writing work and just trying our best to be kind of good homies and good neighbors. Those are some nice little titles lately.
For some reason, something in that reminded me of a book I read recently, which was co-written by, I cannot remember the name of the co-writer, but it also co-written by Jane Goodall, and it's called The Book of Hope. For me, that one landed pretty heavily because a lot of it is him interviewing Jane, talking about how, as somebody who is steeped in the climate crisis, how she still finds hope for the future. Yeah. And there's some really interesting stuff in that. So maybe that's what I will share back to you as maybe this would be a good one for you.
Good. Yeah, I lost faith in this country a while ago, but I'll never lose faith in my neighbor or in each other. Yeah. That's where we can get into some nice little roundy business for our places.
Yeah, people can be amazing. And we already kind of covered what's a great piece of advice you've been given because we were talking about the Pac-Man rule at Write the Docs. But do you want to talk further about it? Is there anything else you want to share here?
Pac-Man rule for days. Shout out Eric Holscher. I don't know what you're up to, but I hope you're well.
He's still doing Write the Docs.
Is he kicking in Portland to Write the Docs? That makes sense.
He's going to come back on here in a couple months, so we'll have him back. He is, I believe, currently traveling in Southeast Asia also.
Wow.
So, doing Eric things.
So another piece, I keep like all sorts of goodies just like at my, I don't know when this was written. I'll show you. I know we're on video, but this is a random article from the New York Times that I think, I'm trying to see, it's in the Sunday magazine. New York Times is Sunday magazine. There's no date on here, but it's like super old. But this young lady, Joanne Rode, I guess at the time CEO of Axial Exchange, headline, know when to get in and to get out. But there was a passage in here about being a young person trying to find your first gig. And she's just like, do your homework on like what a company does. Like she talks about all the times that she's interviewed people and they're like you actually don't know what we do. Why did you apply for this gig?
Wow.
So this is something I keep on my desk, not only in terms of like prospective care block partnerships. We of course want to demonstrate that we've actually done our homework and know what you're into and how it can serve both of us. But we also very much lean on this in terms of kind of cultural humility as well. Just to make sure that we're doing stuff that, because public life and urban design, I mean, people live in so many different ways. I used to live in a mostly Hispanic neighborhood, and I've never seen so many people party in their front yard. For all the quinceañeras, I mean, that's Hispanic culture. They party in the front yard, which is such a gift. And then so you recognize things that you can tell are for the good of a neighborhood, bringing parties back to the front yard instead of the backyard. But being deeply aware of not like co-opting things or appropriating things. Yeah, so that's interesting work for us as well. But yeah, those are the goodies. That's what I'm pondering these days.
I love it. It's a lot to ponder. And then lastly, Jacob, if anybody listened to this and they were like, ooh, I'm really interested in care block or in anything that you had to say and they wanted to get in touch, what would be the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, I remember I was pushing the Not Boring Tech Writer on Twitter way back in the day, but I'm not a Twitter kid no more, or X, I guess. They're not next, or at least not active there. The account may be floating around somewhere. But I'd say I'm most active. If they want to learn more about CareBlock's work, just our website, careblockdevelopment.com. You'll see a hyperlink icon there to our Instagram. So I hang out on CareBlock's Instagram quite a bit. The handle's at CareBlock Development. That's where we post about our projects, our housing, our block parties, our economic development work. And then from there, you'll find like a weird web of other interests. I might cross-post my side premium tin fish pop-up that I run. It's called Sardinia. It's Portuguese for sardine. I love it. I am the tin fish plug in Denton. Cats need to know. And then yeah, I'd say mostly Instagram, and then also in the bio of the CareBlock Instagram, there's a link to our Substack. I recently started writing again, which I've just loved. Mm-hmm. There's a book, We Learn Nothing by Tim Kreider, and he documents this moment where like he feels like he can actually live another day if he chose to write. I've been so kind of preoccupied with other kind of tasks lately, but started writing again, and I do believe the body keeps score. And I am like feeling like, oh, yes, I'm writing again. Like, this is really cool. So just if you're curious to get more thoughts on kind of the philosophical side of CareBlock's work, myself and my dear baby brother, Zach, hop on Substack as well. And of course, hop in DMs. I'm on LinkedIn. Jacob Scott Moses on LinkedIn.
And we'll grab links to all this stuff and drop it in the show notes, so don't feel anybody that you have to rewind and listen exactly to it. We'll point you there.
Yeah, and we're just big advocates for, of course, just building prosperous neighborhoods everywhere. So if anyone's interested in real estate development and loving on their neighbors through real estate, there is an understandable bad rap for the developers. They are gentrifying our places. They are extracting wealth. They are displacing communities. But there is a movement to essentially empower what we are, a small scale developer, where there is that cultural humility, that empathy that can translate to actual improvements in quality of life. So also happy to offer guidance in that work as well.
Well, thank you so much, Jacob. This has been a delight. And as always, thank you for your generosity of knowledge and ideas and spirit. I love it.
Thank you all. Thanks for making the Not Boring Tech Writer so happen. I know kinfolk are feeling it, and you're doing a great job hosting.
Oh, thank you for starting it so I could inherit it. And
your colleague Chad blessing with a mic. I love my new mic. Thank you, Chad. Shout out, Chad.
Shout out, Chad, without whom this current iteration of the Not Boring Tech Writer would not exist, because he keeps everything running. He is the power behind the mic, I will say.
That's right. So, shout out, Chad. Thank you, Chad.
The Not Boring Tech Writer is co-produced by our podcast head of operations, Chad Timblin, and me. Post-production is handled by the lovely humans at Astronomic Audio, with editing by Dylan, transcription by Maddie, and general post-production support by Bean and Alex. Our theme song is by Brightside Studio. Our artwork is by Bill Netherlands. You can order the Not Boring Tech Writer t-shirts, stickers, mugs, and other merch from the merch tab on thenotboringtechwriter.com. You can check out Knowledge Owl's products at knowledgeowl.com. And if you want to work with me on docs, knowledge management coaching, or revamping an existing knowledge base, go to knowledgewithsass.com. That's knowledgewithsass.com. Until next time, I'm Kate Mueller, and you are the Not Boring Tech Writer.